In Ukraine, a hospital, a kindergarten, and an orphanage are among the latest targets of deadly Russian attacks. This, as heavy fighting continues in the key eastern city of Bakhmut. Let's get an update from CNN's senior international correspondent, Ben Wheaton. He's joining us live from the war zone. So, Ben, how brutal are these latest Russian assaults in the east?
Well, it does appear they're picking up their tempo at the moment. Now, keep in mind that, for instance, beginning last September, Wolf, the Russians changed their tactics and were really focusing on Ukraine's ability to generate power that provides electricity and warmth to the population during the harsh Ukrainian winters. But the Ukrainians, for one thing, their air defense capabilities have drastically improved, and they have also proven very adept at sort of solutions to the situations created when that infrastructure was hit. So now the Russians seem to be changing their focus, focusing on military targets, but in the process, we're seeing more civilians are being killed. Now, yesterday in Slovyansk, 2 civilians were killed, more than 30 people injured when there was a strike on that town. Now, it just so happens that the strike also hit a military recruiting center. So they are focusing more on supply lines, military infrastructure, but in the process, many people are being killed. Now, as far as the battle in Bakhmut, the commander of Ukrainian land forces says that their focus at the moment is to try to, in his words, destroy as many of the enemy as possible and prepare for a or rather create the conditions for a counteroffensive. Fighting continues to be intense also in the town of Avdiivka, which is south of Bakhmut. There, the Ukrainians say that the Russians are trying to wipe that town off the face of the earth.
It looks exactly like what they're doing. These images of what we're showing our viewers now are horrendous. Indeed, civilian targets that the Russians have unloaded on. As you know, the Ukrainian President Zelensky made another stop in his unannounced visits across Ukraine that's been going on these past few days. Is this an attempt by him to boost morale?
Well, today he was in Sumy in northern Ukraine, and over the last 7 days, he's also paid visits to the regions of Kherson and Kharkiv. Those are regions that until quite recently were under a Russian control. Now, keep in mind, these visits, high-profile, unannounced visits, come at a time when more new armor, tanks and other heavy weaponry is arriving in Ukraine. And certainly anticipation is mounting about this possible Ukrainian spring counteroffensive. And I think this is his way of showing that he has confidence in the future and what the coming weeks and perhaps months will bring. Wolf. All
right, Ben Wheaton, stay safe over there. Thank you very much. Let's discuss these latest developments with CNN military analyst, retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Layton, and CNN contributor on Russian affairs, Jill Doherty. Colonel Layton, 24 Russian attacks over the last day or so, according to a Ukrainian report, the heaviest combat concentrated along the Eastern Front. What is Russia's strategy at this point in the fight, specifically targeting these civilian areas, these residential apartment complexes, schools, kindergartens, for example?
Yeah, Wolf. So the basic idea behind the Russian strategy is to soften things up for a continuation of their offensive. Now, it looks like their offensive has basically been stalled around Bakhmut. But what the Russians seem to be telling us is that they're using towns like Avdiivka and Vuhledar to actually move their forces forward. Now, they're not successful at the present time, but as they're softening things up in the civilian sector, like with the orphanages, the hospitals, the kindergartens, they're looking at trying to create those conditions where they can potentially bring their forces into territory that's currently held by the Ukrainians. I don't think they'll be successful, but that's what they're trying to do.
And Jill, as we noted, these latest Russian strikes hit a kindergarten, a school, and a hospital. We've seen this brutality before from the Russian military. This cruelty seems to be deliberate, but what's your analysis?
Well, I think obviously some of it is deliberate, and then some of it is simply their inadequate fighting techniques. and weapons that, are not precise. I saw this, Wolf, in Chechnya, where they essentially flattened, the capital, Grozny. And this is a technique that they use. They're using it in Syria as well. So it's not surprising. But I think, some of the interesting stuff is their projection of power in the Far East, which is, very far from Ukraine, but I think very connected to that fight.
Yeah, going after the civilian targets in Ukraine, clearly war crimes that are under investigation right now. Colonel Layton, a Ukrainian commander, says Ukraine's trying to wear down the Russian army in Bakhmut. That's a key city on the front lines, of course. Is that strategy working?
Well, it seems to be at least partially working, Wolf, because a lot of Russians and Wagner Group mercenaries are actually falling victim to this. The Russians are losing quite a few men in this fight. In fact, there are huge cemeteries that are being built up in the south of Russia because of this. So it does seem as if this is a part of the Ukrainian strategy that is at least potentially working. I'm not sure it is the most cost-effective strategy, but it is certainly something that they're using right now.
And I noticed, Jill, that just a few hours ago, a Russian fleet fired missiles at a mock target off the coast of Japan. So what message is Putin sending?
I think there are a couple. Number one, force projection. We can go anywhere. That's part of it. But I also think, look at what happened just about a week ago. The Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Kishida, went to Kiev on a surprise visit. Very strong show of support for Ukraine. The Russians obviously are quite angry about this. And there you're getting, action in the Far East with last week there were strategic bombers. They used cruise missiles coming from a submarine. And I noted that the secretary of the Russian Security Council, Mr. Patrushev, said the U.S. is pushing Japan to militarize, just like World War II, he says, and turn Japanese citizens into kamikazes. So this is, more of the same, that it's all the United States behind everything, just as they say that the United States is, trying to militarize Ukraine and use it to attack Russia. It's really, I think, again, it's a signal that they are worried, angry, and the battle is not going well.
Yeah, good point. Jill Doherty, Colonel Cedric Layton, guys, thank you very, very much.